The lecture hall buzzed with the typical pre-class chatter of students discussing weekend plans and upcoming assignments. Professor Zelnak's Ancient Galactic Civilizations course attracted beings from across the known galaxy, creating a colorful tapestry of species in the tiered seating arrangement. Crystalline Vorthan students glowed softly in the dim lighting, while the feline Kythera groomed their fur nervously before the morning exam. In the third row, seat 47B, sat what appeared to be an unremarkable human female. Her attendance record showed perfect punctuality over the past semester, though she rarely participated in class discussions. To her fellow students, she was simply Sarah Chen, a quiet graduate student pursuing xenoarchaeology. Her professors knew her as a diligent worker who turned in thorough research papers on time. None of them knew that Sarah Chen had once been Colonel Sarah Reaper Chen, the most decorated human military officer in the Terran Defense Force. None of them knew that her tactical brilliance had turned the tide of the Zephyrian War, or that entire enemy fleets had retreated upon learning she commanded the opposing forces. Sarah adjusted her worn backpack and checked her tablet for the day's reading assignment. The simple motion felt strange after decades of checking weapons and battle readiness reports. Her hands, once steady on plasma rifle triggers, now held styluses and datapads. The transformation from feared warrior to anonymous student had taken considerable effort. The Galactic Peace Accords had changed everything. After the Zephyrian surrender, the galaxy had entered an unprecedented era of cooperation and academic exchange. Universities that had once been closed to certain species now welcomed diversity. Research replaced conquest. Knowledge became the new battlefield, though a considerably more peaceful one. Sarah had volunteered for early retirement when the accords were signed. At 35, she was young for a colonel, but old for starting over. The Terran Defense Force had offered her prestigious positions in the new peacekeeping forces, but she had declined them all. The weight of command, the responsibility for so many lives, had taken its toll. She wanted to learn instead of lead, to discover instead of destroy. Professor Zelnak entered the lecture hall, his 6 arms carrying various teaching materials. The Altarian professor was ancient even by his species' standards, having witnessed the rise and fall of several galactic civilizations. His compound eyes swept across the assembled students with practiced ease. "Today we examine the collapse of the Andromedan Empire," Professor Zelnak announced, his translator converting his harmonic speech into words each species could understand. "Who can tell me the primary factors that led to their downfall?" Several tentacles, claws, and hands shot up around the room. Sarah kept hers down, though she knew the answer better than most. She had studied the Andromedan military structure extensively during the war, looking for weaknesses in their descendants' fighting techniques. A young Rigelian student answered enthusiastically about resource depletion and overextension. Professor Zelnak nodded approvingly, then launched into a detailed explanation of economic collapse and social upheaval. Sarah took notes, genuinely fascinated by the civilian perspective on military history. She had seen empires fall in real time during the war, the methodical destruction of supply lines, the psychological warfare that broke enemy morale, the strategic strikes that crippled entire civilizations. But hearing about it from an academic standpoint, understanding the long-term consequences for civilian populations, gave her new insights into the true cost of conflict. "Miss Chen," Professor Zelnak said suddenly, startling her from her thoughts, "you seem particularly focused on the military aspects of the Empire's fall. Do you have any insights to share?" The lecture hall fell silent. Sarah rarely spoke in class, and her fellow students turned to look at her with curiosity. She felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, the same feeling she had experienced during her first weeks on campus. Speaking up meant potential attention, and attention meant questions she was not ready to answer. "I think," she said carefully, "that military overextension often reflects deeper societal problems. An empire that needs constant conquest to maintain stability is already failing from within." Professor Zelnak's compound eyes glittered with interest. "Elaborate, please." Sarah chose her words carefully. "When a civilization can only maintain unity through external threats, it suggests that their internal bonds are weak. The Andromedans needed to keep fighting to prevent their various species from questioning why they were united in the first place." "A perceptive observation," the professor said. "You speak as if you have witnessed such dynamics firsthand." Several students chuckled at the absurdity of the suggestion. Sarah was young by galactic standards, barely past her species' adolescence. The idea that she might have personal experience with Imperial collapse was laughable to her classmates. Just speculation based on historical patterns, Sarah replied, relieved when Professor Zelnak moved on to discuss economic indicators. After class, Sarah packed her materials quickly, hoping to avoid the small groups that often formed for post-lecture discussions. She had learned to navigate campus social dynamics carefully, maintaining enough interaction to seem normal while avoiding deeper relationships that might lead to uncomfortable questions. Sarah, wait up. The voice belonged to Crix, a young Zentorian whose purple-scaled hide shimmered with excitement. Crix was one of the few students who had made repeated attempts to befriend Sarah, despite her polite but distant responses. That was brilliant analysis in there, Crix said, falling into step beside her as they left the lecture hall. You always seem to have these insights about military history. Are you from a military family? The innocent question hit closer to home than Crix could possibly know. Sarah's family had indeed been military, though not in the way he might imagine. Her parents had been colonists who died defending their settlement from raiders. Her brother had served in the early conflicts that eventually escalated into the Zephyrian War. Military service had been her path to purpose after losing everyone she cared about. Something like that, she said noncommittally. I should head to the library. Professor Martinez wants us to finish the research proposals by next week. Right, the xenoarchaeology project, Crix said. What's your topic again? I know you mentioned something about battlefield archaeology. Sarah's choice of research focus had been deliberate. Battlefield archaeology allowed her to use her military knowledge while pursuing purely academic goals. She wanted to understand how warfare shaped civilizations from an archaeological perspective, how the remnants of conflict influenced cultural development. I'm studying weapons cache sites on former battlefields, she explained. How abandoned military equipment affects local ecosystems and cultural development in post-conflict societies. That sounds fascinating, Crix said genuinely. I bet Professor Martinez loves having someone with your analytical skills. You see patterns that the rest of us miss. If only he knew what patterns she was really seeing, Sarah thought. When she looked at ancient battlefield sites, she did not just see archaeological evidence. She saw tactical formations, supply line vulnerabilities, defensive positions. Her mind automatically analyzed terrain advantages and strategic choke points. The archaeological significance was secondary to the military insights that came naturally to her. They walked across the central campus plaza, a vast open space where students from dozens of species mingled between classes. The diversity still amazed Sarah, even after months on campus. During the war, she had only seen other species as enemies or allies. Here, they were simply fellow students struggling with assignments and social dynamics. A group of Vorthen students near the fountain were discussing their quantum mechanics homework, their crystalline bodies resonating with mathematical equations. Nearby, several Kythera were sharing a meal, their feline grace evident even in the simple act of eating. The scene was peaceful in a way that still felt surreal to Sarah. Hey Sarah, Crix said as they reached the library steps. A bunch of us are getting together tonight to study for Zelnak's midterm. Want to join? We could use someone with your perspective on the military history sections. The invitation was tempting. Sarah had been on campus for months, maintaining her careful distance from meaningful relationships, but the loneliness was beginning to wear on her. She missed the camaraderie of her military unit, the sense of belonging that came from shared purpose and mutual trust. I'll think about it, she said, which was progress from her usual immediate refusals. Inside the library, Sarah made her way to her preferred study corner on the 4th floor. The spot was isolated enough to provide privacy, while still offering a view of the campus grounds below. She had chosen it partly for tactical reasons that she tried not to acknowledge, even to herself. Old habits died hard. She pulled up her research files and tried to focus on her archaeological analysis. The battlefield site she was studying had been the location of a significant engagement during the war. Not one of her battles, thankfully, but one she had studied extensively for strategic lessons. Looking at the site through archaeological eyes was both fascinating and disturbing. The academic approach focused on cultural impact and environmental recovery, but Sarah could not help seeing the human cost hidden in the data. Each weapons cache represented soldiers who had never made it home. Each defensive position marked a place where someone had made their last stand. Her tablet chimed with a message from Professor Martinez asking about her research progress. Sarah composed a professional response about her preliminary findings, carefully avoiding any mention of her personal connection to the subject matter. As the afternoon wore on, other students began filling the library study spaces. Sarah observed them with the same analytical mindset she had once applied to enemy movements. Not because she saw them as threats, but because observation and analysis had become second nature to her. A group of Rigelian engineering students were working on a project involving sustainable energy systems. Their collaborative approach reminded Sarah of her old tactical planning sessions, though with considerably lower stakes. A pair of human literature students were debating the cultural significance of pre-war poetry, their passion for their subject evident in their animated discussion. These students had grown up during peacetime, Sarah realized. They had never known the galaxy when it was divided by species barriers and territorial conflicts. For them, interspecies cooperation was normal. The idea that humans and Centaurians had once fought bitter wars was historical curiosity, not lived experience. Sarah envied them their innocence while simultaneously feeling protective of it. The peace they took for granted had been purchased with blood and sacrifice. Her blood and sacrifice, among many others, but that was the point, was it not? They were free to pursue knowledge and relationships precisely because others had fought to make such freedom possible. As evening approached, Sarah gathered her materials and headed back to her small apartment near campus. The building housed mostly graduate students, providing a quiet environment that suited her need for privacy. Her neighbors were polite but not intrusive, which was exactly what she needed. Her apartment was Spartan by most standards, furnished with only the essentials. She had never been one for material possessions, a trait that had served her well during her military career. The most personal items in the space were a few books on archaeological methodology and a small plant that her neighbor had given her as a housewarming gift. She prepared a simple dinner and sat at her small table, reviewing the day's notes. The routine was comforting in its predictability, so different from the chaos and uncertainty of her military life. No urgent communications about enemy movements, no life or death decisions to make before dawn. Her tablet chimed again with another message from Crix, reminding her about the study group and providing the location details. Sarah stared at the message for several minutes, weighing the benefits of social interaction against the risks of deeper connections. Finally, she typed a response accepting the invitation. It was a small step, but perhaps it was time to be slightly less careful about maintaining her distance. The war was over, the galaxy was at peace, and she was supposed to be building a new life. She changed into more casual clothes and gathered her study materials. The walk to the designated meeting spot would give her time to prepare mentally for extended social interaction. It had been so long since she had engaged with people purely for companionship rather than military necessity. The study group was meeting in a common room in one of the residence halls. Sarah could hear voices and laughter from down the hallway as she approached. For a moment, she hesitated, remembering similar sounds from her old unit's rec room during rare moments of downtime. She knocked softly and entered when Crix called out a welcome. The room contained 6 students from various species, all arranged around a low table covered with tablets, books, and snacks. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, exactly the kind of environment Sarah had been avoiding for months. "Sarah, you made it," Crix said enthusiastically. "Everyone, this is the Sarah I was telling you about. She has amazing insights into military history." The introductions were cheerful and welcoming. Sarah found herself seated between a Vorthan named Kristek and a human student called David who was pursuing a degree in diplomatic history. The conversation flowed easily around topics of study strategies and shared academic challenges. "So Sarah," David said during a break in their review of Andromedan history, "what got you interested in battlefield archaeology? It's such a specific field." Sarah had prepared for this question, but actually answering it still felt uncomfortable. "I think understanding how conflict shapes societies is important for preventing future conflicts," she said. "Archaeology gives us objective data about the real costs of war." "That's a noble goal," said Latha, a Kithara student whose amber eyes reflected genuine respect. "Do you think studying ancient battlefields helps us understand modern peacekeeping?" The question was more perceptive than Latha probably realized. Sarah's research was indeed motivated partly by her desire to understand how to maintain the current peace. Her military experience had taught her how easily conflicts could escalate, how quickly diplomatic solutions could fail. "I hope so," Sarah replied honestly. "Peace requires constant work to maintain, Understanding how past conflicts developed and ended might help us avoid repeating those patterns. The conversation continued late into the evening, ranging across historical periods and theoretical frameworks. Sarah found herself gradually relaxing, contributing more naturally to the discussions. Her fellow students were genuinely intelligent and thoughtful, approaching their studies with passion and curiosity. When the study session finally ended, several students exchanged contact information and made plans for future meetings. Sarah accepted invitations to join them again, surprising herself with her willingness to commit to ongoing social connections. Walking back to her apartment under the campus night lighting, Sarah reflected on how strange it felt to be part of a group again. The camaraderie was different from military bonds, built on shared intellectual interests rather than mutual survival. But it was genuine, and it filled a void she had not fully acknowledged existed. Back in her apartment, she sat at her desk and opened a secure communication channel she had not used in months. The message she composed was brief and coded, but it would reach her former commanding officer with an important update. Integration proceeding successfully, she wrote. Academic cover maintaining effectiveness. No security concerns identified. Continuing mission as planned. She sent the message and immediately deleted it from her local storage. Her presence on campus was not entirely coincidental. The Terran Defense Force had wanted someone to monitor the new academic exchange programs, to ensure that the sharing of knowledge did not compromise human security interests. Sarah had volunteered for the assignment partly because it offered her a genuine chance to pursue academic interests while serving a useful purpose. But as she prepared for bed, she wondered how long she could maintain the dual identity. Her fellow students were becoming real friends, not just covers for her mission. The transition from Colonel Chen to Student Chen was more complex than she had anticipated. In trying to become someone new, she was discovering aspects of herself she had never had the chance to explore. The question was whether she could successfully integrate both identities, or whether she would eventually have to choose between her past and her future. Outside her window, the campus settled into quiet night rhythms. In a few hours, she would return to classes and continue building her new life. But for now, she allowed herself to remember the weight of command, the responsibility for thousands of lives, and the satisfaction of duties faithfully performed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in her ongoing mission of becoming ordinary. Tonight, she could acknowledge that the transformation was harder than any battle she had ever fought. The archaeological dig site sprawled across 20 hectares of barren landscape, marked by carefully gridded excavation squares and protective canopies. Sarah stood at the edge of the main excavation area, tablet in hand, documenting the systematic exposure of what had once been a major battlefield. Professor Martinez moved between student teams, offering guidance and encouragement as they uncovered layers of history. Remarkable preservation, Martinez commented, approaching Sarah's documentation station. The environmental conditions here have maintained artifact integrity far better than we expected. Your preliminary site analysis was spot on, Sarah nodded. Though she knew her accuracy had less to do with archaeological insight than with intimate familiarity with military logistics. She had fought in similar terrain during the war, understood how weapons were deployed and supplies were cached. Reading the landscape came naturally when you had once planned battles across it. 3 months had passed since her first study group meeting with Crix and the others. What had started as careful social experimentation had evolved into genuine friendships. Sarah found herself looking forward to their regular gatherings, enjoying debates about historical interpretation and theoretical frameworks. The loneliness that had marked her early months on campus had largely disappeared, but the closer she grew to her fellow students, the more complicated her situation became. Her mission report obligations to the Terran Defense Force required her to maintain professional distance, but her personal growth demanded deeper connections. The balance was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. "Sarah, can you come look at this?" called David from Excavation Square C7. His voice carried excitement and puzzlement in equal measure. She made her way across the dig site, noting how efficiently the mixed species team worked together. Crix was using his natural strength to move heavy stones, while Christek's Vorthan precision made him invaluable for delicate artifact extraction. The cooperation was seamless in a way that would have been impossible during the war years. "We found this cluster about 2 meters down," David explained, gesturing to a carefully exposed section of earth. "The metal composition is consistent with military equipment, but the arrangement is strange." Sarah looked down at the excavation and felt her heart skip. Even partially buried, she recognized the pattern immediately. It was a command post cache, designed to be quickly accessed during retreat or resupply operations. The arrangement that seemed random to archaeological eyes followed precise military logic. "It looks like emergency supplies," she said carefully. "Maybe a fallback position for retreating forces. But why bury it so systematically?" asked Letha, who was working the adjacent square. The spacing and orientation suggest deliberate placement, not hasty concealment. Sarah's mind raced through tactical possibilities while she struggled to find an appropriately academic response. The cache had been designed for retrieval by surviving personnel who knew the correct approach vectors. The burial pattern would make sense to any military engineer but would appear arbitrary to civilian researchers. Perhaps it was meant to be recovered after the conflict, she suggested. Some military organizations planned for post-war salvage operations to reclaim valuable equipment. Professor Martinez nodded thoughtfully. That would explain the careful placement. Sarah, your military history background is proving invaluable for understanding these sites. Have you considered focusing your dissertation on battlefield archaeology? The suggestion was both appealing and terrifying. Specializing in battlefield archaeology would allow Sarah to use her expertise more fully, but it would also invite closer scrutiny of her background. Graduate advisors expected detailed knowledge of how students developed their research interests. "I'll definitely consider it," she replied. The intersection of military history and material culture is fascinating. As the day's excavation continued, Sarah found herself serving as an unofficial consultant on military artifacts and battlefield interpretation. Her explanations were always framed in academic terms, drawing on historical examples rather than personal experience. But she could see her fellow students beginning to wonder about the depth and specificity of her knowledge. During the lunch break, the team gathered under a large canopy for meals and informal discussion. The conversation ranged across various topics, from excavation techniques to weekend plans. Sarah participated more freely than she had early in the semester, though she remained carefully vague about her background. "So Sarah," Crick said, unwrapping what appeared to be a traditional Zentorian nutrient bar, "you never did tell us what you did before coming to the university. Your insights are too specific for someone who just read about military history in books." The direct question caught Sarah off guard, though she had been expecting it eventually. Her carefully constructed cover story felt inadequate when faced with genuine curiosity from people who had become friends. "I worked for the government for a while," she said, which was technically true. "Administrative work related to military affairs. Nothing exciting." "That explains a lot," David said. "Having access to official records and after-action reports would give you perspectives that most academics never see." Sarah seized on the explanation gratefully. "Exactly. You learn to read between the lines when you spend time with bureaucratic documentation." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Sarah noticed Letha watching her with thoughtful amber eyes. Kithara were naturally observant, and Sarah suspected that her evasive responses were not entirely convincing to someone trained to read social cues. The afternoon excavation session yielded more discoveries that confirmed Sarah's analysis of the site's military significance. The team uncovered personal equipment caches, communication relay positions, and what appeared to be a field medical station. Each find reinforced the picture of a carefully planned defensive position. "This is incredible," Professor Martinez said as they documented the day's discoveries. "We're looking at a complete military infrastructure, preserved almost intact. Sarah, your interpretations are helping us understand the human elements behind the strategic planning." Sarah felt a familiar pride in contributing to understanding, though it was complicated by the knowledge that her insights came from creating similar installations rather than studying them. The archaeological perspective was genuinely enlightening, showing her the long-term consequences of decisions she had once made purely for tactical advantage. As the team prepared to return to campus, Sarah lingered at the excavation site, looking out across the landscape with different eyes than her companions. 3 years ago, she might have stood in this same spot, planning defensive positions and calculating fields of fire. Now she was helping to understand how those same decisions had shaped the historical record. The transformation still felt surreal. Colonel Sarah Chen had measured success in objectives achieved and casualties minimized. Student Sarah Chen measured success in artifacts properly documented and historical patterns correctly identified. Both versions of herself were driven by the desire to understand and protect, but the methods were entirely different. Back on campus, Sarah joined the others for dinner in the central dining commons. The mixed-species environment still amazed her, though she had learned to hide her wonder at seeing former enemies sharing meals and academic discussions. The Kithara students who laughed at David's jokes had once been part of a warrior culture that considered humans barely worthy opponents. "Earth to Sarah," Crick said, waving a purple-scaled hand in front of her face. "You seem distracted tonight." "Everything okay?" "Just tired," Sarah replied. "Long day at the dig site." "Speaking of which," Christek interjected, his crystalline form chiming softly as he spoke. "Professor Martinez mentioned that the university is planning a major conference on conflict archaeology next month. Several prominent researchers will be presenting papers on battlefield sites across the galaxy." Sarah felt a chill of concern. Academic conferences meant scrutiny, peer review, and detailed discussions of methodology. Her cover story might not withstand the attention of experts who specialized in military history and archaeology. "Sounds interesting," she said neutrally. "Martinez thinks you should present a paper on your cache site analysis," David added. "Your military perspective has been so valuable that other researchers would benefit from hearing your approach." The suggestion was professionally flattering but personally terrifying. Presenting at an academic conference would require defending her interpretations and explaining her methodology to experts who might recognize gaps in her formal training. More dangerously, it might attract attention from researchers who had connections to military intelligence services. "I'm not sure I'm ready for conference-level presentation," Sarah said. "Maybe next year, when I have more formal training." "Don't sell yourself short," Litha said quietly. "Your insights are more sophisticated than most graduate students achieve after years of study. There's obviously more to your background than administrative work." The gentle challenge hung in the air like a suspended blade. Sarah met Litha's amber gaze and saw genuine concern rather than suspicion. Her friends were not interrogating her out of distrust, but because they cared about her and sensed that she was carrying burdens she could not share. "Everyone has aspects of their past they prefer not to discuss," Sarah said finally. "I appreciate that you all respect my privacy." "Of course," Crick said immediately. "We're just glad you're part of our group. You bring perspectives none of the rest of us would ever consider." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Sarah remained unsettled by how perceptive her friends were becoming. The closer their relationships grew, the harder it became to maintain necessary boundaries. She genuinely cared about these people, which made deceiving them increasingly painful. Later that evening, alone in her apartment, Sarah composed another coded message to her Defense Force contact. The archaeological dig was progressing well, yielding valuable intelligence about pre-war military installations and strategic thinking. But her personal integration was becoming complicated by emotional attachments that compromised her operational security. She stared at the draft message for several minutes before deleting it unsent. The intelligence value of her archaeological work was minimal compared to her original mission parameters. The real question was whether her growing connections to civilian life represented mission success or mission failure. Her tablet chimed with an encrypted message from command. Sarah opened it with growing apprehension, knowing that contact from headquarters usually meant changes to her assignment parameters. "Conference attendance mandatory," the message read. "Present cover, research as planned. Maintain academic identity at all costs. Further instructions to follow." Sarah set down the tablet with trembling hands. Command wanted her to attend the Conflict Archaeology Conference, presumably to monitor what other researchers were discovering about wartime military activities. But presenting her research would expose her to exactly the kind of scrutiny she had been trying to avoid. She walked to her small window and looked out across the quiet campus. Students moved along the pathways between dormitories and study centers, their conversations mixing languages and perspectives from across the galaxy. The peaceful scene represented everything she had fought to protect, but it also represented everything she was now deceiving. The next morning brought a new challenge in the form of Professor Martinez requesting a private meeting. Sarah arrived at his office with carefully prepared explanations for various questions he might ask, though she suspected none of her rehearsed responses would address his actual concerns. "Please, sit down," Martinez said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his cluttered desk. The office walls were lined with artifacts and photographs from archaeological sites across the galaxy, testament to a long career spent uncovering hidden histories. "I want to discuss your conference presentation," he began without preamble. Your work on the cache site analysis has attracted attention from some very prominent researchers. Dr. Vex High, from the Rigelian Institute, specifically requested that you be included in the program. Sarah kept her expression neutral despite her alarm. Dr. Vex High was one of the galaxy's leading experts on military archaeology, with particular expertise in human military organization. If anyone could recognize the true depth of her knowledge, it would be him. I'm honored by the attention, she said carefully. But I'm concerned about presenting research that's still in preliminary stages. That's exactly why this opportunity is so valuable, Martinez replied. Dr. Vex High is interested in your methodological approach to military site interpretation. He thinks you have insights that could revolutionize how we understand battlefield archaeology. The praise was professionally gratifying but personally alarming. Revolutionary insights usually came from revolutionary perspectives, and Sarah's perspective was certainly unique among civilian researchers. What exactly would he expect me to present? She asked. Martinez pulled up a file on his desk tablet. He's particularly interested in your ability to reconstruct military thinking from archaeological evidence. Your cache site analysis demonstrated understanding of tactical decision-making that impressed even military historians who attended our preliminary presentation. Sarah felt her carefully constructed world beginning to shift around her. Military historians at academic conferences would ask different questions than her current classmates. They would probe deeper into her methodology and expect detailed knowledge of military doctrine and strategic thinking. I'll need some time to prepare properly, she said. This kind of presentation requires more research and documentation than I've completed so far. Of course, Martinez agreed. You'll have full department support for additional research. This could be the foundation for a very distinguished academic career, Sarah. Your unique perspective on military affairs could establish you as a leading voice in conflict archaeology. As Sarah left Professor Martinez's office, she realized that her mission parameters had fundamentally changed. What had started as simple academic cover for intelligence gathering had evolved into a genuine career opportunity that could benefit both her personal goals and her original mission objectives. But success in academic terms would require revealing more of herself than she had ever intended. The conference presentation would either establish her credibility as a legitimate researcher or expose her as something far more complex than a graduate student pursuing xenoarchaeology. She walked across campus toward the library, passing groups of students engaged in animated discussions about their various research projects. The normalcy of their academic concerns highlighted how far she had traveled from her military origins, yet the skills that had made her an effective colonel were the same ones that made her archaeological insights so valuable. The challenge now was finding a way to use her military experience to build an academic career without compromising either her cover identity or her genuine relationships. The upcoming conference would test whether Colonel Sarah Chen and student Sarah Chen could successfully coexist, or whether she would eventually have to choose between her past and her future. In the library's quiet study spaces, Sarah began planning for what might be the most important presentation of either of her careers. The stakes were higher than any battlefield she had ever faced, because this time she was fighting not just for mission success, but for the right to continue building the life she had unexpectedly come to treasure. The war might be over, but Sarah Chen's most difficult battle was just beginning. The grand auditorium of the Galactic University buzzed with intellectual energy as delegates from across known space settled into their seats for the third day of the Conflict Archaeology Conference. Sarah stood backstage, reviewing her presentation notes one final time, acutely aware that the next hour would either cement her academic credibility or expose secrets she had guarded for over a year. Dr. Vex High's introduction echoed through the auditorium's advanced sound system. His harmonic Rigelian speech patterns translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. Sarah listened as he described her research in terms that made her work sound far more revolutionary than she had intended. Our next presenter has brought an unprecedented perspective to battlefield archaeology, Dr. Vex High was saying. Her analysis of tactical decision-making through material evidence represents a paradigm shift in how we understand military archaeology. Please welcome Sarah Chen from the Terran Archaeological Institute. Sarah walked onto the stage to polite applause, her tablet containing a presentation that carefully balanced genuine insights with necessary misdirection. In the audience, she spotted her friends from the study group sitting together in the third row, their faces bright with excitement and pride. Seeing them there both strengthened her resolve and deepened her anxiety about maintaining her deception. Thank you, Dr. Vexhai, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. Today, I want to discuss how understanding military psychology can enhance our interpretation of battlefield archaeological sites. She launched into her prepared presentation, walking the conference attendees through her analysis of the cache site. Each point was supported by archaeological evidence and historical precedent, carefully avoiding any indication that her insights came from personal experience rather than academic study. The slides showed detailed reconstructions of tactical thinking based on artifact placement and site organization. Sarah explained how military commanders made decisions under pressure, how logistical constraints shaped battlefield choices, and how psychological factors influenced strategic planning. The analysis was sophisticated enough to impress military historians while remaining grounded in archaeological methodology. The key insight, she continued, clicking to a slide showing comparative site analyses, is that military personnel think systematically about efficiency and survival. Understanding these thought patterns allows us to interpret archaeological evidence more accurately than purely material analysis would permit. Dr. Vexhai leaned forward in his seat, compound eyes glittering with interest. Several other prominent researchers were taking detailed notes. Sarah could see that her presentation was having exactly the impact Professor Martinez had predicted, but in the fifth row, she noticed a figure that made her blood run cold. Admiral Thorne, former commander of the Terran Defense Force's Intelligence Division, sat motionless among the academic delegates. Their eyes met across the auditorium, and he gave the slightest nod of recognition. Sarah managed to continue her presentation without faltering, though her mind raced through implications. Admiral Thorne's presence could not be coincidental. Either her cover had been compromised, or command had decided that direct contact was necessary. Neither possibility was reassuring. She concluded her presentation to enthusiastic applause and opened the floor for questions. The first several were straightforward academic inquiries about methodology and comparative analysis. Sarah answered them confidently, drawing on her genuine archaeological training and carefully prepared research. Then Dr. Vexhai raised one of his forearms. Your insights into military psychology are remarkably sophisticated, Miss Chen. Have you had the opportunity to interview veterans of these conflicts to verify your interpretations? The question was more perceptive than it appeared. Dr. Vexhai was asking whether her psychological analysis was based on academic theory or practical knowledge. Any response would need to navigate carefully between honesty and operational security. I've reviewed extensive after-action reports and military documentation, Sarah replied, which was technically true. The patterns of decision-making are quite consistent across different conflict scenarios and species. Fascinating, Dr. Vexhai continued. Your reconstruction of command-level thinking is particularly accurate, almost as if you had personal experience with military command structures. Sarah felt the attention of the entire auditorium focused on her response. Admiral Thorne remained motionless in his seat, offering no guidance about how much truth she could safely reveal. Military organizations tend to develop similar solutions to common problems, she said carefully. Understanding those organizational patterns makes it easier to interpret archaeological evidence of their activities. The answer seemed to satisfy most of the audience, though she noticed several researchers making additional notes. The remainder of the question period focused on technical aspects of excavation and analysis, safer territory that allowed Sarah to demonstrate her legitimate archaeological expertise. As the session ended and delegates began moving toward the reception area, Sarah gathered her materials and tried to plan her next moves. Admiral Thorne would undoubtedly want to speak with her, but she needed to maintain her academic cover in front of her fellow students and colleagues. Sarah, that was incredible. Crix bounded up to the stage, his purple scales practically glowing with excitement. You sounded like you really understood how military commanders think. Where did you learn so much about tactical psychology? Before Sarah could respond, the rest of her study group surrounded her with congratulations and questions. Their enthusiasm was genuine and touching, but it complicated her need to have a discreet conversation with Admiral Thorne. We should celebrate, David suggested. There's a faculty reception tonight, but we could have our own party afterward to mark your conference debut. That sounds wonderful, Sarah said, meaning it despite her current stress. Let me just handle some administrative details first, and I'll catch up with you later. She watched her friends leave the auditorium, chattering excitedly about the presentation and its implications for her academic career. Their pride in her success made the deception even more painful. These people had become genuinely important to her, and she was lying to them about fundamental aspects of who she was. Admiral Thorne approached as the auditorium emptied, his civilian clothes doing little to disguise his military bearing. Up close, Sarah could see that he had aged significantly since she had last seen him during her retirement ceremony. "Colonel Chen," he said quietly, using her old rank for the first time in over a year. "Impressive work, both the research and the presentation." "Admiral," she replied, automatically falling into military courtesy despite their civilian surroundings. "I wasn't expecting to see you here. Your reports indicated that you were developing valuable intelligence through academic channels," he explained. "Command wanted to assess the potential for expanding this type of operation." Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. "Expanding how, sir?" "Walk with me," Thorne suggested, leading her toward a quiet corridor away from the conference activity. "Your archaeological work has provided insights into pre-war military installations that traditional intelligence methods missed. Command is interested in establishing a permanent academic intelligence operation." The implications were staggering. Sarah had assumed her assignment was temporary, a brief monitoring operation during the early phase of galactic academic exchange. The possibility of making academic intelligence gathering a permanent part of her life had never occurred to her. "Sir, I should mention that my academic relationships have become more complex than originally anticipated," she said carefully. "Maintaining operational security while building necessary cover relationships has created some complications." Admiral Thorne studied her with the penetrating gaze that had made him legendary in intelligence circles. "Explain." Sarah chose her words carefully. "The academic community values collaboration and transparency. Building credible research relationships requires a level of personal investment that makes maintaining cover increasingly difficult." "Are you saying you've become emotionally compromised, Colonel?" The question cut straight to the heart of Sarah's internal conflict. Her relationships with Crix, David, Letha, and the others had indeed become emotionally significant. They were no longer just cover for her mission, but genuine friendships that she valued for their own sake. "I'm saying that successful long-term academic cover may be incompatible with traditional operational security protocols," she replied diplomatically. Admiral Thorne was quiet for several minutes, processing her response and its implications. When he spoke again, his tone was more thoughtful than administrative. "Your psychological profile suggested you might adapt well to civilian life," he said finally. "Command selected you for this assignment partly because we believed you could genuinely integrate into academic culture while maintaining mission focus. The integration has been more successful than anticipated," Sarah admitted. "But that success creates its own challenges." "Indeed." Thorne looked out through a window at the campus grounds, where students from dozens of species moved between buildings in casual interaction. "The galaxy has changed significantly since the war ended, Colonel. Perhaps our intelligence methods need to evolve as well." Sarah waited for him to continue, uncertain whether this conversation was leading toward expanded mission parameters or operational termination. "Command has reviewed your reports and research contributions," Thorne continued. "Your archaeological work has provided more valuable intelligence than traditional monitoring operations. More importantly, it has done so while contributing to galactic stability rather than undermining it. Sir, academic cooperation builds the trust that maintains peace," he explained. "Your work supports both intelligence gathering and diplomatic objectives. Command is prepared to offer you a unique assignment." Sarah felt her heart racing as Admiral Thorne outlined the proposal. The Terran Defense Force wanted to establish a new type of intelligence operation, one that contributed to galactic academic cooperation while providing strategic insights. Sarah would be offered a permanent position that combined legitimate archaeological research with intelligence analysis. The assignment would allow her to continue her academic career while serving useful military functions. More importantly, it would eliminate the conflict between her cover identity and her genuine interests. Student Sarah Chen and Colonel Sarah Chen could finally coexist openly, at least within certain classified parameters. "There would be conditions," Thorne continued. "Your academic colleagues would need to be carefully vetted and gradually briefed on certain aspects of your background. The operation would require building a team of researchers who could be trusted with classified information." Sarah thought immediately of her study group friends, wondering whether they could handle learning about her military background. Crix, David, Letha, and the others, had accepted her as a fellow student pursuing academic goals. Learning that she was also a highly decorated military officer might change their relationships in unpredictable ways. "I would need time to consider the proposal," she said, "and to evaluate how it might affect existing relationships." "Of course. But Colonel, understand that this represents a significant opportunity for both your personal development and galactic security. Academic intelligence operations could become a crucial component of maintaining peace." As they walked back toward the conference reception, Sarah's mind wrestled with the implications of Admiral Thorne's proposal. The opportunity to combine her military experience with her academic interests was appealing, but it would require fundamentally changing her relationships with the people who had become most important to her civilian life. The reception was already in full swing when they arrived, with researchers from across the galaxy sharing drinks and discussing their work in animated groups. Sarah spotted her friends near the refreshment table and excused herself from Admiral Thorne to join them. "There's our star presenter," Letha said warmly as Sarah approached. "Dr. Vexhai was just telling us how impressed he was with your analysis. He wants to discuss potential collaboration opportunities." Sarah accepted congratulations from several other researchers, her mind still processing Admiral Thorne's proposal. The academic community was genuinely excited about her work, offering opportunities for research and career development that she had never expected when she first enrolled as a graduate student. "You seem distracted," Crix observed quietly, pulling her aside from the main conversation. "Everything okay? You've seemed tense since your presentation ended." The direct question forced Sarah to confront how perceptive her friends had become about her emotional state. Maintaining her cover required constant attention to such details, but it also meant that genuine relationships became increasingly difficult to manage. "Just processing everything," she said, which was essentially true. "A lot of new opportunities to consider." "Good opportunities, I hope," Crix replied. "You've worked hard for this recognition." As the evening continued, Sarah found herself observing the reception with new eyes. The easy interaction between species that had recently been enemies, the collaborative spirit of academic research, the genuine friendships forming across cultural boundaries, all of it represented the peace that she and countless others had fought to achieve. Admiral Thorne's proposal offered a way to protect that peace while pursuing her own academic interests. But it also required a level of honesty with her friends that might fundamentally change their relationships. The question was whether those relationships were strong enough to survive learning the truth about her background. Later that night, alone in her hotel room, Sarah composed a message to Admiral Thorne, accepting his proposal in principle, while requesting additional details about implementation. She also drafted a much more difficult message to her study group friends, requesting a private meeting to discuss something important about her background. The second message remained unsent as Sarah wrestled with how much truth she was prepared to reveal. Her friends deserved honesty, but they also deserved protection from the complexities of military intelligence operations. Finding the balance between those competing obligations would require more courage than any battle she had ever fought. The conference had established her academic credentials and opened doors to a career that could combine her military experience with her scholarly interests. But the real test would be whether she could maintain the relationships that had become central to her new life while acknowledging the responsibilities that connected her to her old one. Outside her window, the university campus stretched beneath starlight from dozens of worlds. The peaceful scene represented everything she had fought to protect and everything she now hoped to preserve. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she navigated the complex integration of her dual identities, but tonight she allowed herself to feel pride in how far she had traveled from the battlefield to the lecture hall. Colonel Sarah Chen and student Sarah Chen were finally ready to become the same person. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for who that person might become.